In the previous lesson, we saw how we can import objects from external sources into MUDBOX, and also how we can study them, how we can manage them and manage the selections and the also sculpting tools. So how we can sculpt on top of those objects, and we saw the difference between having a low poly model and high poly model just by sculpting. So we need to work with the mesh essentially here, and we're gonna discover some of the tools that we have in the mesh. We already talked about the display, and we can activate wireframe to see the structure, which is essentially the polygonal structure, and so how the various faces are disposed on the surface, and how many they are. So those can be also considered as subdivisions. So the number of polygons, the level of subdivisions is important to have more or less details. So you can go from like really complex objects, reduce the number of polygons, and you can go the other way, but we're gonna see that later. I'm gonna create here a sample head in the create menu, and I want to move it just a little bit with the sculpt. So I'm moving the polygons essentially. When I use the sculpt tools, I'm working on those polygons. I'm pushing and pulling those polygons. Now let me move this object aside so that we can work a little bit better on that. So you can see there is a really simple structure. This is a low poly model, and this is good when you need to define the overall shape, the generic shape of the object, but it's not good when you need to get down into details. So we're gonna see again how the polygons are really important to define the quality, to define the realism, to define the details. And so we want to work also with the level of subdivisions and so on. But we're gonna focus again on the polygons, on how we can also import other different formats using websites, and how we can manage the mesh, so the polygons essentially, and the structure of the object. So we're gonna make more examples about importing, managing, and preparing the work for our sculpture, which we're gonna do later on. But this is really interesting and really important, because by importing and studying the other objects, you can see how they worked with the details, how they worked also with the maps and so on. So in the previous video, we worked with these models, this armchair we got from Polyoven, and we can see here the wireframe. It's important to know if we are working on a low poly model or high poly model. Sometimes, again, we need to reduce the number of polygons. Sometimes we need to increase the number of polygons to enhance the realism and the details. Now we also saw this model here from Polycam, which is a head sculpture, and this was not low poly at all. This was really high poly, and we need to fix this using the merging of the vertices, and we use Blender for that, which is one particular software which is open source. Now if we click here, we can have more information about, again, the name, if you want to get the exact model, and also the author. Well, sometimes we find also the number of polygons, which is a really important information, but it's not here apparently. So we saw that we need to export here in GLTF and then convert it into OBJ or FBX using Blender in our case, but you can also use other converters, other 3D converters. So get Blender, it's free, it's open source, you can just download it, install it right away, you don't need an account or anything, and this will help you in many operations. And as I told you also in the previous video, I usually use Blender just to convert files. So I import a file that is not readable by MUDBOX, and I export it into something that can be readable by MUDBOX. And usually I do the same thing also for other software. So it's an excellent software. It's free, it's open source. So why not download it and use it? Now I'm going to show you here another website which is called Sketchfab. It's a really popular website, and here you will find a lot of different models. Now I usually do a search using CC0, which means totally public domain, totally free, and I can use it anyhow. But also CC BY, it's a permissive license that will help you to work on all these models, you can study all these models. You can also use them for later use, but you need to credit the author. Now you can see that you have a lot of different jewelry. I want to concentrate more on the jewelry in this video because this is something that we can definitely do with MUDBOX. And you can see this one here. It's a project. That's the name, and also you can find the author down there. Now this is a scanning of these rings. So these rings probably exist in reality, and they have been scanned with a scanner, with a 3D scanner. And look how detailed they are. You can see the texture on the surface, that really noisy bump, superficial noise bump, and you can see really tiny details. Now these meshes like this is the final output. This is like the highest level of subdivisions probably. This one here, I'm gonna show you like different examples so that you can understand. This one here, it's a really simple ring actually, but it contains a lot of polygons. Look at that. So it has like, well, that's the name and the author there. Again, if you wanna see it, if you wanna study it, if you wanna download it, well, here to download it you need to have an account. But we can see the vertices here and the triangles. Triangles are the polygons essentially. So you're gonna see there it has a really high number of polygons. And here, if we click on more model information, we can see again the license and the format available. FBX will be good for MUDBOX, but also we have GLTF. Now every time you're gonna find GLTF, so it's kind of a saving format, so you can use any object from Sketchfab in a GLTF. Now this one here, it's another ring, and this is also pretty heavy, and well, but this is justified because it has a lot of details. You have like carvings and you know, surface, 3D surface effects. And this is another format again. It's called DAE or Collada, and this format right here is not available in MUDBOX. So we either download it in Collada or GLTF. So either way, we need to convert it using Blender or another 3D software. And this is another one. I like this because it's kind of a sculpture placed on top of a ring. So it's a bull skull head or something. And you can see this is, again, really high. But this is justified because it's an actual sculpture. It's not like a superficial 3D surface. And this is OBJ. So this is going to be okay with MUDBOX. So sometimes we have a really high number of polygons, and that's justified. Sometimes not. This one here instead is a really complex model. Again, it has a lot of details, a lot of carvings and bas reliefs and all that noise there. It looks pretty detailed, but let's see how many polygons. These are really low poly. So it's a really low poly object, but with a lot of details. So what's the trick here? Well, first, let's see, this is another Collada. So again, you can download it in DAE or GLTF and then convert it. So the bottom line is why this really simple ring has a lot of polygons while that really complex one, it has so few polygons. Well, that's because it depends how it has been like constructed and developed. And also if we want to print it, or if you want to use it just for a rendering or for a video game or things like that. Now in Sketchfab, you can also activate here the inspector, so we can actually see the wireframe before importing it into a 3D software. And we can see that this one here has a really high poly structure. So except the diamond, but the diamond is a really like you know, sharp shape, so it doesn't need all that curviness, doesn't need all those polygons. Now usually models that have a lot of polygons, and it's because they have like a lot of details like this again, text and all those tiny like deformation on the surface.